Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. This is Dharma Talk, and I'm Rabia Ilahi. I'm a licensed psychotherapist in Houston, and I do energy healing as well. The word, I didn't explain this last time, but I wanted to tell you the word Dharma can mean many things. It can be our purpose, our mission. It can also be right thought and right action. And so I created Dharma so that I can share with you right and true information that I've had the privilege of learning over the years with education, life experience, access, opportunity, all of that, that not everyone has. And so my intention is always to be of service to you in the highest way that I can be, and to have guests on the show that also share that same philosophy, that what they say comes from their heart and from the highest intention. Today, we're going to be talking about depression and race. Depression is a huge topic. I think 1 in 6 people report suffering from depression at some point in their lives. And it's fairly common, but it can be quite severe. And things like race and culture and ethnicity and socioeconomic status, all of that can affect depression, how we express it, how we talk about it, the acceptability of it, and whether or not we seek treatment. So, having said all that, I have 2 beautiful, amazing guests today. Both of them I know well as professionals and as amazing women of color and healers. Are they joining me now? Eliza, where is she? Eliza and Shamitra. Oh, there's Shamitra. There's Eliza. Hi. Okay.
Hi.
So I'll start with Eliza. Eliza is a licensed psychotherapist who works with people to overcome past traumas, emotional pain, and destructive relationship patterns so they can begin to enjoy healthier, pleasure-filled lives. That's a lot. You can find Eliza working with clients at her private practice called the Flow and Ease Healing Center. That'll show up in a bit. And she hosts workshops and public speaking events, empowering people to have healthier relationships. And she is a help. So in addition to Eliza, all of your clinical work, she does public speaking and is the host of Chakras plus Sex plus Relationships podcast and co-host of Between Sessions podcast. Oh my gosh. Okay. The other reason I chose Eliza is because she's a very active mental health advocate, and she's a co-founder of Melanin and Mental Health, which is a mental health wellness brand centered around the healing of Black and Latinx communities. And she and her work have been featured in, oh, get this, Cosmopolitan, Men's Health, Therapy for Black Girls podcast, Exo Nicole, Bustle Shape, and Health Magazine. Oh my God, how do you do all this? And you've got kids, and you have a husband. I don't get it. Okay, anyway, Shamitra. Shamitra Green is also an amazing woman and healer and therapist, a licensed psychotherapist. She's the founder of her private practice called Nexus Therapy, where she works with adolescents, adults, and families in Pearland, Texas, and the surrounding areas. So it's kind of near Houston, but basically all of that. Shamitra's populations include individuals and families dealing with complex trauma and PTSD. Complex trauma, Shamitra, I'm gonna have you back because that's a huge topic all on its own. Yes. Survivors of neglect and sexual abuse, grief and attachment disorders. In addition, Shameitra is doing just added chakra healing to as a certified energy healing practitioner for trauma treatment and your belief in addressing holistically trauma and grief and just the individual in all of our more than physical forms. Shamitra also has a podcast called From My Couch to Your Couch, where you bring together friends, esteemed colleagues, and experts in mental and emotional health and physical wellness world to provide care to everyone. So, welcome, ladies. Anything you want to add to this impressive list of y'all? I guess.
I think you got it. I mean, I'm like, ooh, I want to get to know these ladies.
I know. Yes, I think anyone would be lucky to know you both. And so I am lucky. So I really wanted, what interested me in this topic in particular is how common depression is, with the rates having, I think, tripled during the pandemic. And instead of like falling down, they've continued to rise because of the after effects and all of that. And I also know that race and religion and culture and all of these things play a role in depression. So I wanted y'all to talk about what you see and what you know of how, in such a broad topic, these different systems affect the way we feel and the way we deal with things in life.
Sure.
Whichever one.
Just want to start from there. All right. Well, I think you can't separate it. There's so many ways, not just in how we deal with it, but what is adding to our vulnerabilities for suffering from depression, for example. So Black and brown folks, people of color, we have unique stressors that we face on a day-to-day basis, right? Where we have to deal on a day-to-day basis with racism, with discrimination. It wasn't just the pandemic that I think was so heavy for us to carry, but everything that we were seeing that was going on, within the world, and issues around social justice, and the messages that we were getting about just existing, right? Like, it's just existing. And I think even, you add to it colorism, right? Because when we talk about the Latinx community, we have a tendency of thinking of it from like as a monolith, and it's not, right? Like within that, depending on what race you are within the Latinx community as well. So I think there is no way that we can separate them, especially because we are dealing with factors that are unique to our communities. And then the access that we have to care is limited, right? What we have lower chances of having access to it. And when we do access it, it's hard for us to find representation within that. So people that can understand, that look like us, that come from our communities, that understand the cultural nuances. So we can't separate it from how we experience it, why we experience it, and the type of treatment that we can receive.
What do you use in the African American?
You were kind of breaking up a little bit, Rabia.
Can you add to that? Sort of.
Yes. So, everything that Eliza said, I'm nodding. Definitely with the familiarity of it in the African American community. I think what also came up for me as Eliza was talking was, in everything that was happening during the pandemic, there was this kind of a racial ethnic awakening that was happening. And so within that, I think there also became a a happiness a little bit in people are seeing things from a different perspective. We're able to talk a little bit more from parallel experiences, even across the communities of color, while at the same time being exhausted, being able to sit in that space of I'm still living this and I've been living this, while also kind of having to explain more, being looked at as teachers and across the board, really trying to figure out how to take care of yourself and where do I stand in that? Are there times where it's like I can't be a teacher, I can't be a leader in it because I need to sit and I need to feel it and I need to still sit in the shock of, after so many generations, a lot of what I'm experiencing as a zennial, as I guess is the category, are some of the very same things that I remember hearing my mom and my mother talk about. The things stories that were passed down from my grandparents, and just being in the shock of why is it 2020 and it feels very similar to 1950.
Yep.
So I think that also had to play into mental health, the depression, the management of it as it relates to the African American community, in dealing with the pandemic, while also dealing with the racial awakening that was occurring.
Both of you said the I guess the gift, if we could call it that, of the pandemic was that people were at home to pay attention to things that people of color have been experiencing for generations.
Sure.
And then, I mean, the 4 years preceding the pandemic were really bad for people of color because of, the national talk, by our leaders that somehow we're dangerous, we're crazy, we're drug dealers, we're terrorists, we're, name it. And so what did you see in your own life shift over the course of the years, especially when you started practicing?
Well, I think for me, I started seeing, professionally, I started seeing more so women of color, Black women who were coming and they wanted to be in a space where it felt safe for them, where they felt like they didn't have to do a lot of explaining about what they were feeling or who they are, and they could align in the cultural nuance with a mental health professional that they feel like you get it. Because I really want to come in and I just really want to be able to receive and to pour and to, pour out my emotions versus having to be cognitive and teach while trying to figure out how to feel about what's going on. So I would get calls where it's like, look, are you comfortable with me coming in and really just emotionally disrobing, so where it didn't have to be I need to look a particular way in expressing myself. I think a lot of times in the African American community, there's this duality of how I feel, but also having to always recognize how I need to be perceived because I can't come across as too angry, too hostile, and all of that. And so really not even wanting to deal with that. Like, I really want this to be my healing space, that if I am coming and I am pretty upset and it comes across as rage, guess what? It's okay, because this is my humanity and it's not going to be judged based off of, me being a black woman or a Black man. So I was seeing that a lot. I was seeing, and even with myself, I was struggling a bit again with, I'm glad that people are seeing things and they're kind of awakening to certain things, but I'm also mad about it. I'm mad that it took this long, I'm mad that, you know, why did we have to get here when we've been saying the same thing for so many years and generation, and our loss and our pain has been televised before. It has been, you know, and so what is it about this moment? So I kind of felt like while people were coming to me for better understanding and connection, I also needed to know what's different about this moment for you, because for me as a African American woman, for me as a, you know, African American therapist, um pain has been loud, pain has been clear, and why are you just now hearing it? So that's what was happening. I remember during the election, one of the very first things, I was talking to another dear friend and colleague, and you all I think know her, but she's younger than me, and you know, she's a white friend and colleague, and we were talking about the election, and I remember she was saying, I just really don't believe that America is going to put somebody in charge, really, that has been so divisive. And like, I don't think that we're there. And I remember sitting there being like, I wish I had the privilege to kind of sit, you know, and kind of be naive like that. And I remember saying, okay, well, we'll see about it. And so the next morning, I remember, you know, we met up and she was so sad. She was so devastated. She was so disappointed. You know, she was and sad. She was almost sad to be a white woman, honestly, you know, and she was apologetic. And I remember sitting there and being like, she's arrived at a disappointment and a level of sadness that I've been at. Like this is normal to me, and it was just so earth shattering. And as my friend, I remember being like, I want to take care of her because I know how it feels. But then there's also a part of me that just wants to be like, I don't know what to tell you, but welcome. You know, like, you know, this is what it is. So it was, I think for me the 4 years was a lot of being able to take care of myself, being able to pay attention to what it is that I need, while also obviously showing up for my clients in the way that I needed to show up for them, and being able to put boundaries behind when today I can connect, today I can, you know, be an educator, be a connector, and tomorrow I just need me. You know, I need to be able to keep me, and really being able to walk a little bit more boldly in that knowing of mine of what I need and when I needed it.
Yeah. Powerful.
Yeah, I think those last 4 years, what was interesting is as everything was happening, you know, politically and with the leadership that we had, and you couldn't not have the conversation of race, right? Like race was at the forefront. And it was interesting because around this time, we were also having more conversations about mental health. I felt like within the Black Latinx communities, you had more celebrities within the community, more musicians, people coming forth and talking about mental health and talking about like, yeah, you know, like this is something that we can also pursue in therapy and all of that. So it was interesting that around the time that this is happening, our communities were having more conversation and being more open to seeking out therapy. So what I began to see, not only in the way that I practice, how I market my practice, right? Like where I was just even more clear on who I wanted to serve, right? Like who I wanted to serve, who I wanted to create a safe space for, because within the mental health field, people that look like me and Shameitra and you, Rabia, like we're limited, right? So I was like, I want to be very specific, very clear about the space that I am creating for my clients. And what I was seeing the shift, so I was seeing more clients from our communities wanting to come in, like I've never been to therapy before, but you know, I'm gonna try it. So they were coming in. And so as things continue to progress, I was hearing more from my clients the impact that what was happening, politically and within the country, like how it was impacting them, whether that was with a client of mine who maybe their immigration status, was being threatened, and they are professionals and they are, doing all the right things, but then they're being grouped as, a threat to the country, whether that was my Black clients who have to deal with this pressure to educate, or they're the only Black person in their department, and everybody's looking to them to also be the cultural diversity and inclusion department at the same. Like, I didn't sign up for this, right? But also feeling this duality of like, well, I also feel like obligated in some sense that I do have the opportunity to speak. So much of that was impacting people at work, in their personal lives. And so I was able, like, on one hand, I was glad that they now had a space to process that, but it was heavy and it was deep. And then especially like last year, with you're dealing with the pandemic. You don't know what the hell's going to happen the next week, the next month. What is this? Are we all going to perish by the end of the year? Like, what is this? So just the ungrounding of that and this collective experience that we're having. But then on top of that, I'm watching people that look like me get beat, get killed. And then I'm hearing my white colleagues or white friends or white peers, still kind of justifying that. Mm-hmm. And so what that was creating for them, and the frustration and the heaviness, it took such a toll on everybody. Mm-hmm. But I think in particular for Black, Indigenous people of color, right? Because there was this added layer of, I'm seen as a threat. Mm-hmm. So many of us were, what's the word I'm looking for? Vilified.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That I've shared just even my own experience. I'm like, I was born in Illinois. Like, you don't get like more American than that, but I'm getting screened for coming back in the country. Like I'm like having to show extra paper and like, so there was this heightened anxiety, mm-hmm. right? This heightened anxiety that we could not get away from, mm-hmm. That went beyond just what a mask could keep us from.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I remember also being part of the messaging of the pandemic was almost this like, okay, everything's shut down. You don't really have anything to do. So this is when you need to come out and be the best person. The memes that was, if you haven't started an LLC and like everybody should have been up and going. And what I've always said to that notion was, I believe the pandemic and everything that happened in it gave everybody what they needed pre-pandemic. So if you were somebody who, for whatever reason, movement, distraction, kind of getting away from yourself was part of how you cope, then the pandemic had you slow down, face yourself, have real conversations and self-inventory to where you needed to take some time to rest, to have respite, to do what you needed to do to connect to yourself and not ignore yourself. Mm-hmm. If you were somebody who was, for whatever reason, dealing with life where you were kind of in a paralysis, or you were stopped, or you were stuck, then the pandemic gave you, whatever kind of that, okay, the motivation to see yourself in a way where you could create movement. So whichever way it was, I almost felt like the pandemic met you where you were at and took you where you needed to be. And then kind of adding one more thing to what Eliza was saying, and what I missed out on was, while I was getting more African American women coming in, particularly some African American men as well, what my passion became was making sure that we didn't stay stuck in this narrative about people of color, because we all come from communities where we hear time and time again, and it still is valid, where we struggle to go to get mental health. That's just kind of not what we do. And though that is our historical context, I thought it was important as a therapist to kind of move the needle along and say, but this is also what's happening in my healing space. Mm-hmm. There are Black men and Black women who are being agents of change and coming and saying, you know what, I need to show up for myself. I need to do it different than how it was taught to me. Mm-hmm. And I believe that we have to continue to move that message along, just like we do of the historical. We're still getting there where we're making mental health more a priority, because the more we let people know that people are coming, and then the more other people are like, oh, so we're doing this too. Mm-hmm. Some of us are still resisting, but some of us are forging full ahead, and we need to have both of those narratives on the table so that we're not continuing to outdate ourselves with a narrative that is not all encompassing of what's going on in our communities.
Yeah. While we're talking about this, I want to show what the psychological community considers to be depression. And so, because I think anxiety and fear and lack of safety play into that. And those are maybe areas that are more prominent in some communities than in others, you know? So I'm wondering, Renee, if we can put up that slide on. Okay, so according to the American Psychological Association, they have a manual that we use for diagnosing. And for depression specifically, they have a list of symptoms, and we need, when we're diagnosing, we need to see if a client has 5 or more of these lasting over a course of 2 weeks, consecutive weeks. And then one of the 5 symptoms has to be either a depressed mood most of the day, or no interest in doing anything that you once enjoyed doing. So if you look at this list, it's subjective because it's using words that each of us is translating based on our version of depressed mood. What does that look like? You know, a significant change in weight. Well, there could be other things going on. So I'm wondering if y'all could speak to maybe how this list wouldn't, how a person of color or from a marginalized community would look at this and then, you know, as well as clinicians, but look at this and translate into a way that makes sense and doesn't make it so scary and yet serious.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the challenges that we have, you know, from our communities, I think, especially Black and Brown communities, is that so much of our worth, especially for women, for Black and Brown women, is tied around servitude, is tied around doing for everyone. And we are rewarded for how much pain we can tolerate, right? So it's like we are so disconnected from ourselves that we may not even recognize that we are tired, that we are struggling, because we're so hyper focused on others. And I think the other part to that, as people whose ancestors have been colonized, right? Like, so we were taught that our worth is tied to our productivity. Our worth is tied to enduring. Our worth is tied to just kind of, we're not even seen as human. We're seen as machines, like something to produce. And so I think it's difficult because so much of that is embedded in us also, because that is how our people were colonized, and we continue to carry these beliefs and these ideas that we don't even recognize that they're there, and that the culture has also rewarded. So the more pain I can tolerate, the stronger you are, the more worthy you are, the more you are celebrated, right? Like I was just talking to someone about this earlier today. I think I posted about it earlier today too, was especially for women. If you don't complain, if you keep going, if you keep pushing through it, like those are the women that are celebrated. Oh my gosh, she's such a good woman. She never complained. She was suffering. She was diagnosed with a terminal disease, but you know what? She never complained, and she continued to do for others. Right? So it just perpetuates this idea that we don't matter. And so I think you add to that the spiritual aspect also. So for example, like even within my community, it may not be viewed as depression, because it's like depression, like what is that? No, we don't get depressed. Like you don't have time to be depressed. Keep going, keep moving, keep doing. And we might see it as like a spiritual attack, right? Like you know, it's a result of the evil eye, you know, or like un ataque de nervios, right? Like, so it's some sort of nervousness. So it'll be anything other than, or you're disconnected from your spirituality. You're not praying hard enough. You have lost God, right? And so it will be seen as everything other than, hey, you might have something going on that qualifies as depression. But I think there's a certain shame that we have around that is also tied to, I'm supposed to just endure. Like that's where my strength comes from. That's where my worth comes from. So to say like something is holding me back, no, like that sometimes that's difficult for us to even recognize or even label ourselves with. Add to that we're discouraged to get support for that. Like therapy, what? Like that's for white people. You know, that's not for us, right? Like go to church, speak to the priest or talk to the pastor, but no, we don't have time for therapy. I mean, we don't have time to be depressed. Shake it off, you know, throw some water on your face, keep it moving.
And what comes up when I was looking at that list, it was like 3 words that came up for me, and it was gratitude, it was resilience, and it was specifically, you know, for Black women, the strong Black woman. And so I could see someone looking at that list, and it goes right into what Elisa's saying. You know, I have to recognize that as people of color, one of the things that the only thing that we had in the systemic oppression of this country is our spirituality. You know, it was a place of power. And so I understand that is a huge part of our identity. But oftentimes I call it kind of gratitude shaming. And I'm always speaking of how gratitude and grief can coexist. But oftentimes in that spiritual domain, it's like if I focus on what's wrong, then how dare I, because I'm not being grateful. There's always someone that has it worse. There's all, you know, and sometimes I'm talking to my clients and I'm like, well, there's people that have it worse, but there are people that have it better too, you know. And so and it doesn't mean that you have to denounce your humanity in order for you to feel like you're elevating yourself in your spirituality. You know, we all know it, especially in our energy healing work, is spiritual bypassing. So that came up for me. The resilience, you know, resiliency. I feel like, again, we all come from communities where we have tried for so long to claim the authorship to our narrative in this country, because, you know, we've kind of been told who we are. The story of who we are as people has been put out there. And so as, you know, time has gone on, kind of in the space we're in now, we are like, no, I'm going to take the authorship of our narrative. And part of how we flip that is to be able to acknowledge how resilient of a people that we are. But I sometimes think that gets conflated with resiliency and then a claim and an identity to struggle. Like you haven't, you know how Black you are means how much you can get down and you can struggle. And it's like, why does, you know, why does that have to be the definition of how Black you are, how Latinx you are, is how much you can struggle? And so again, I understand the origin. I understand the beauty of, you know, our culture saying we're not going to look at ourselves as victims and helpless. You know, we're going to see like, God, we take so little that's given, and we're still people that grow, and we're still people that is beautiful. But there has to be a balance in that, where we're not conflating keeping ourselves sick and dehumanized as, you know, a way of saying, and that's because we're resilient, you know, because all that does is it works on the behalf of the people who need to continue to oppress us.
Yes.
By saying, oh yeah, you are strong, you know, those things help them to continue to benefit off of the weight that we carry on our backs.
That's right.
Absolutely. And what keeps coming to my mind is this separation of our emotions from our bodies, our physical bodies. And so, Eliza, to what you were saying about you're tired, you're not getting enough sleep, or you're you know, it's you don't, that's just how life is. You know?
Yeah. And I think part of that also, you know, is kind of the immigrant mentality, right? Where so many of us come here because the idea is like, you're going to work hard, you're going to push through. And so there is this expectation of struggle and of working hard and of going to create a better life for our loved ones. And so so often that doesn't get healed, right? Like, so I'm not in survival mode the way maybe my parents were in survival mode, but that was what was taught to me. And so now I'm thinking, yeah, you got to hustle, you got to push, you got to struggle, right? So again, that's like what Shameitra is saying. That is part of the conditioning, right? Again, going back to colonization, that's part of the conditioning. Like, you will be rewarded for working really, really hard, or you won't be rewarded at all, but your well-being will somewhat be okay, right? Like, you'll survive. And there's so much unlearning that we have to do that I think is like a lifetime's worth of work, and that we may not even see the full benefits of it, you know, in our lifetime. But it has to start somewhere, because it's just that intergenerational trauma that continues to get passed down and passed down and passed down, and that keeps us, you know, stuck. That keeps us stuck.
You know, both of y'all brought this up, and I think it's so important. You know, the big lie is that we don't have any power, we don't matter, and so you just kind of have to take what's done to you, what's given to you, keep working hard, but you don't really have any power to change things. You know, and I think that's like genius brainwashing, is to make us believe that we don't deserve, and if we do, well, sorry, there's no power. You really can't affect change in your life. You don't deserve to either, you know. Right. And that's a big lie.
Well, and to your point, Rabia, that's the perfect breeding ground for depression.
Yeah.
When I feel that I don't have options, when I think that I don't have options, when I think that I'm powerless, when I'm ungrounded, right? Like, if we think of it in energetic terms, like when I'm ungrounded, that is where depression loves to settle into, right? And so when I think of it as a lack of life force energy, right? Like, I don't have that life force that helps me get out of the bed, that helps me to be able to just navigate throughout my day, right? And so we're so disconnected from ourselves, from others, from Mother Nature, right? Like, and so going back to the pandemic, right? Like, how this just amplified all of that, right? So again, and then we're dealing with unique stressors. If you are, you know, a BIPOC person in this country, you undoubtedly have unique stressors that someone who is not, doesn't have to worry. Shamitra has certain stressors that I don't have, right? I might be, a woman of color also, but there are certain stressors that, my sister has that I don't have because of the color of her skin, right? Because of how she is perceived. And then I have certain pressures or stressors that you might not have, Rabia, right? So there's so many different factors. And if we don't consider race, if we don't consider ethnicity, if we don't consider immigration status, language barriers, we're leaving so much out of it.
Yeah.
And I think even which Rabia, I'm so grateful for being on your platform. I'm so grateful for having friends and colleagues, that we can be women of three, different color population having these conversations, because I remember having a lot of conversations over the course of the pandemic about allyship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of going to what Eliza is talking about. And so it was communities of color coming together and saying, how can we be more supportive of one another? As I spoke to organizations, Muslim organizations and Hindu organizations, and they were like, how can we be better allies to, African Americans?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking about, and kind of in my head, kind of coining this continuum of privilege, and how one of the things that you just spoke of, Rabia, where it's like, trying to make us believe that we don't have power. And I think the other part of that is also giving this belief that there's only a small amount, a limited amount for people of color to be able to be successful and to make it. And part of colonization, part of white supremacy is creating this social totem pole amongst people of color. And so, as I was speaking to people, I was like, I recognize that as a, African American woman, I'm pretty much at the bottom tier of this social, totem pole. But I also have to recognize that who sits below me are, Black American transgendered women, and being able for all of us to recognize where we sit on this continuum, so that what Eliza just did, seeing each other, acknowledging each other, saying we all have our plights, but there are certain things that Shameitra experienced that I don't, and that Rabia I experienced, and being able to acknowledge that with one another, because that's the divider, having immigration come and say, well, this what makes this group different than you, and why, your group is better than this group. And so then you have people of color who can do such a beautiful job of creating parallel experiences for each other and saying, oh my gosh, this is how this is experienced in my community as well. Guess what? Colorism is not just an African American thing. It's a Latinx thing. It's an Indian thing. It's, and for us to be able to even help each other, because depression is isolating. And so when you have each of these groups feeling like I am the only one who is feeling this and feeling it to this magnitude, that's another way that depression kind of continues to seep even deeper into who we are as individuals and to who we are as as community of color as well.
Isolation and separation, huge, because depression feeds on loneliness.
Yes.
And not having connection, and not everyone has a community even. America is not a collective society. And my culture, and I think y'all's cultures too, we're collective cultures. We believe in the village, and of supporting and working together. And like, if someone's down, you help them, there's so much of that. But America's a lonely place.
It's very individualistic. Yeah, that's what's valued.
Someone had a question about, what does BIPOC mean?
Yeah, Black. It's an acronym for Black Indigenous People of Color.
Yeah, if that helps. So, what would you say to someone who would want to know, well, what do I look for in myself, my brother, my sister, that that maybe is of concern, that isn't just working your fingers to the bone and having all of these duties and responsibilities on you? What would each of you look for?
Can you ask that question again? Like, so what are we looking for as far as signs of
Yes.
the depression? Okay.
Yes. And so I know we're clinicians. I'm thinking of maybe someone watching that is wondering, oh, am I depressed?
Yeah.
Is someone I love depressed?
Yeah. I think one of the signs that we don't always acknowledge or talk about is when people they become more irritable. A lot of times depression shows up as anger, right? Like, so are you kind of snapping a lot faster? Your bandwidth is low. You're finding yourself being angry more often, right? Because there's a certain charge that we get with anger, and that mistakenly like we feel more empowered, even though that's when we're most disempowered, when our anger has the best of us. But also, just again, kind of like the low energy, I am not really finding maybe the joy in life that I used to. Maybe I've become isolated. Maybe, like you said, I'm not going out as much as I am. I'm finding myself in bed more often. Or maybe I have just enough energy. Maybe I'm functioning with depression, and so I'm going to work, I'm going through the motions, but I'm just going through the motions. I'm not really present. And hopelessness, right? Like, it's very difficult for me to see that this phase is going to pass. I may have even I've become disconnected from my spirituality. Maybe my spirituality is something that really grounded me, and I practiced it, and suddenly I find not even that is bringing me comfort. And I do think like the overworking can also be difficult, because again, overworking and hustling hard is valued in this country.
Yes.
It is celebrated in this country. And so I think that can be difficult to recognize that I'm overworking, I'm doing the most, right? Like, so are you doing that because you're trying to avoid, right? Like, are you getting lost in your work? Are you getting lost in that? So I would say those would be some of the signs that you can look for within yourself or in somebody. Like, or a telltale sign is they're just different. Like, something like, this is not who I know you to be. Like, what's going on with you? Right? Like, something's going on with you. I can't put my finger on it, but you just lost the joy. You just kind of like, there's like a dark cloud around you.
And I think I would add to it, not maybe what you can see in somebody else, but if people are speaking about just feeling heavy all the time, or almost feeling suffocated, like the walls are kind of closing in on them, I would add that. And I will say that I've had quite a bit, personally and professionally, women of color who would simply come in and acknowledge and say, I don't have time to stop, because if I stop, I'm afraid of where I'm going to go. Like, it's almost like they feel like they're going to fall into this like dark abyss. And so that to me is kind of coupled with what Eliza is saying about the working and the hustle. So, a lot of times I've heard that expression, like, I'm afraid of what would happen if I was to stop. And I think that's a telltale sign of avoidance and just the fear of where you believe that you're going to fall in the depths of possible depression.
Yes. So what are one or two things that y'all would advise maybe someone close to you as opposed to a client? Or like, if the average person is not a clinician and we notice this in ourselves or someone else, and please do not call resting lazy. It is not laziness. That's another big lie. So rest is so critical. What can the average person do if they notice this in themselves? or someone they love? One or two things.
I think one of the things is doing a check-in, kind of, and that became harder in the pandemic because we were all trapped, in our homes. But if somebody comes to mind and you just notice that, there's just something that seems a little bit different, the routine's off, I haven't heard, doing a check-in and just letting that person know I'm available, because depression has a way of also nestling up to you and whispering in your ear that you're a burden and that no one has time for you. So I think that's one of the things, just opening the door and giving somebody the permission to know that I'm here, and however you need me to be, is one of the first things that pops up for me.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Well, of course, I'm going to suggest therapy. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
I'm going to suggest therapy. Like, go and seek out professional support. There are so many options. I think a lot of the times people will say, well, that's too expensive, or my insurance doesn't cover it, or I don't have insurance. And there are so many ways for us to get mental health support, whether that's if there is a college or a university nearby. A lot of the times they have services where the students are getting trained, so you can find low costs like that. Now with the pandemic, more therapists are online, which means you can see anybody in the state, right, that you live in, right? So that opens a lot of possibilities. You have therapists who offer sliding scale. You have community centers that offers sliding scale or free therapy as well. There's online support groups that you can attend. There's hotlines also, like if you're really struggling and you're having thoughts of hurting yourself, there's hotlines that you can call. If you are part of a religious organization, right, like check in with your religious organization. Sometimes they have some mental health initiatives there or some sort of counseling. But I would say connection is healing and it is key. And as much as we want to self-isolate, right? Like if you really want to help yourself, make connection in some way. Even as painful as it can be to make that connection, it is how we heal. We don't heal in isolation. We might need some time to self-reflect and self-care, but isolation is a very different thing.
Yeah. Definitely. I think.
And I would also say start where you feel comfortable. I know that people are, getting more comfortable, and we often talk about how, if your leg was broken, you wouldn't ask God to pray and you would go to a doctor, and we talk about that in the same sense of mental and emotional health. But sometimes people feel more comfortable where they start with their physician. And so, if you're feeling a certain kind of way, you need to go in, go to your PCP and have a conversation about, this is how I'm also emotionally feeling. So that, because there are depression screenings that they do there. And I think for some people, something just about saying my medical physician, referred me over to a therapist, that feels better. So it's like, start where you feel comfortable, just get there. Just, go where you need to go. But that's another way to kind of filter into and combine. And also knowing that because we are mind, body, and spirit, depression is going to have its impact also potentially on you physically as well. And so there may be some things that you start off where, a lot of times in our populations, we're dealing with high blood pressure, we're dealing with diabetes, we're dealing with kind of these common things that show up. And sometimes that shows up in your nutrition, the way that you eat, the way, and so being able to start to the physical and find your way to the emotional, mental, there's nothing that's wrong with that as well. It's really actually holistically taking care of yourself.
That's beautiful, Shameitra, because yes, depression has physical symptoms too.
Absolutely.
And we forget that because it's invisible in the mind.
And it may be show up as pain, as
Yes.
inexplicable pain, right?
Yeah.
Kind of just to also add what you said, Shameitra, about start where you're at. Some people are not ready to start a therapy. So there's so many paths to healing. So whether that is getting energy work, getting body work done, or maybe it starts with self-help books, right? And also there's so many resources out there now. There's podcasts,
Yeah.
there's apps, right? It's like just start wherever you are to seek out that support that's going to just give you that little boost, you know, even if it's just a little boost, to kind of get that momentum going.
Yeah. Great. Ladies, I cannot thank you enough. I know we're coming up on the hour here. Anything else you want to add before, because I want, actually, I want us to continue this discussion. I know I wrote it as part 1. I think we can go 2, 3, 4 parts, because it's so incredibly important, timely, and needed.
Yeah.
It's just needed, So
I-
how can people reach y'all?
yeah.
Come here, Lisa.
So if you want to reach me, you can go to my website. You can see it there on the screen, flowandeasehealing.com. If you are in the state of Texas, we can work together in the therapy realm. I also am an energy healer. I get to add that to my list as well. And I have my chakra healing sisters here with me. So that's something that I incorporate into my work as well. My Instagram, yes, you can see at Eliza G. Boquin. As I mentioned earlier, I am also the co-founder of Melanin and Mental Health. So if you are looking for a therapist, go to melaninandmentalhealth.com. And we specialize in connecting Black, Latinx communities to therapists from our communities. So you can go there as well. You can check out my podcasts, Between Sessions or Chakras, Sex and Relationships. Or you can email me, right? Like you can email me as well.
Great.
And you can find me, my website at nexustherapy.org. I, also have joined these beautiful ladies that have, Rabia kind of started in the modeling of the beauty and the necessity of energy healing in what we do. So again, thank you, Rabia, for being the leader that you are. So I'm excited to say that's a part of my services as well. My Insta is Shamitra Green. Facebook is at Nexus Therapy Healing. I promise in 2022, I'm getting these from My Couch to Your Couch podcast out. So join me there. I have a YouTube channel that's Shamitra Green, LMFT, where you can find me there. And so, yes, so I, look forward to just continuing to do the work that I feel of people that it's not a mistake that they're led my way. And I'm always a believer that we're all students of each other. And so, yeah, so I'm proud of our BIPOC community for taking the steps to show up in ways and be agents of change. And I think that it's just so important to continue to push that messages. So, I'm proud.
Thank you. To all of you watching, I want, and I think Eliza and Shamitra can agree with me, none of us does this alone. And we are meant to connect and be with each other. And we really want you to know how much you matter, how much your life matters, your health matters, your spirit matters. And we see that. We see that. So really want to thank you for listening in with us. So
thank you, Rabia.
thank you, Lisa.
Rabia.